Metronome. Aside from being the universal abbreviation of metrosexual gnome, it is also a very valuable musical tool to help us to stay in time and work on your rhythm. So we're going to talk a little bit about metronomes and different alternatives today, right? So if you don't know, most metronomes work in the exact same way. A lot of them have different features. This is a Korg MA1. You basically turn it on, and then it clicks, right? It's going to default click in clicks of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and many times the accent is going to be on the 1. So if you listen to it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can adjust the BPM, the beats per minute, as it were, and a lot of them have a tap tempo feature. What tap tempo means, if you hit it twice, that's like what your tempo is going to be. So like 1, 2, like 1, 2. That's 152, right? 152 beats a minute. So you can really manipulate these to no end. A lot of them have a ton of different features. You can get one on your phone. There's different apps and stuff like that too. But how do you practice with the metronome is a question that I get a lot. And should you be practicing with the metronome at all? So my thoughts on metronomes are that they're good for certain situations, but I almost always prefer playing with a drum loop instead, right? So basically what we're going to start doing is just going to kind of go over just a real quick practice session. Depending on what your goals are, this could be totally different. We're just going to go through scales and chords real quick, right? So I'm going to start out with a regular beat at, let's go 140 beats a minute, right? So it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's our beat. Now, if we wanted to practice a scale, let's just take the G major scale, right? Which would be here. Let me stop this while I explain it. So the G major scale in this position would be 3E, 5E, 2A, 3A, 5A, 2D, 4D, 5D, right? You should definitely know the major scale if you don't by now. So if you want to practice with a metronome at 140 beats a minute, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, backwards. Right? And then you can just slow that down if you need to, speed it up if you need to. But the other way you can do it is to practice chords, right? So we'll just stick with the G chord. Now if you want to strum, if we just want to go down, up, we do the same thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And this is a really good way to kind of get yourself on point rhythm-wise. Now sometimes it can be hard to hear the metronome over your playing, in which case you might want to amplify the metronome somehow. Also, another cool thing to do is to palm mute it, because if you palm mute a chord, it'll be down more in volume-wise, to kind of help you lock into that metronome better. Now, we're going to talk about the drum loop thing in a minute, but my number one favorite use of a metronome is just to kind of keep track of your progress over time. I think guitar is one of those things where it's really cool because when you're first starting out, you can get better really quickly and you almost feel like you're twice as good one week, and then you just keep going and going, improving. But a lot of people hit a plateau, and there might be even like years where you feel like you're not getting any better, right? But if you're practicing, you are getting better. What's happening is you're just not noticing it as much as maybe you did in the early days. So what a metronome is really great for is to give yourself a solid number that you can reference for future practice sessions, right? Like if you're just kind of like, if you want to shred stuff, right? And you're just working on like a minor scale or any kind of minor scale or whatever, do it to a metronome and keep track of the number, right? And if you're doing it at whatever, 210 beats a minute, and that's your goal, and you can do it cleanly, that's great. Then the next time, try it at 211, right? Because I think if you're practicing without a metronome, it's really hard to tell the difference between 210 beats a minute and 213 beats a minute, whatever. So I think having those numbers and having a way to chart your progress, especially when it comes to speed stuff, is a great way to do it. Now, rhythmically, I'm not a huge fan of metronomes because there's better ways to do it, right? Like some people will maybe just, if they're having a hard time really getting into the groove of something, they'll just slow the metronome way, way down, right? Like maybe something like 62 beats a minute or something like that, right? So if they're trying to hit every downbeat, like just a C chord would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's so much space and it's easy to get lost in that space, right? Like you're just kind of stabbing at what you think a downbeat is, and you're not really teaching yourself good rhythm that way. And also too, another thing about like slower tempos, like if you're practicing at like 30 beats a minute, that's the same thing as if you were to double that. If you're practicing at 60 beats a minute, 120 beats a minute, that is essentially the same tempo. You're just being reminded by the click more often, which is just another reason why faster tempos might actually not be a faster thing that you're doing, especially when it comes to strumming, right? So that's why I want to talk a little bit about my favorite way to practice rhythm, especially strumming stuff, is a drum loop. So I just kind of set up this drum loop at 140 beats a minute. And there are a lot of apps out there. There are even like guitar pedals that you can just make your own drum loops and stuff like that. I'll link you to this one if you want to just do like a quick, kind of easy 140 BPM drum loop. But basically it's going to sound like this. Okay? So if we were to do this with a metronome, it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the pulse of 140 beats a minute. But what's happening, the construction of this loop, is that the hi-hat is actually kind of playing twice that. So if the metronome is at 140, it's playing the click and one in between. So there's more to kind of remind you what's going on. And also there's a kick on the 1, the first measure, and the 1 and the 2, the second measure. And then the snare is on the 3, right? So because we have a little bit of a dynamic, it's almost really just like a dynamic metronome that is reminding you of the beat more. And because it's a little busier, even though this is like a really, really simple drum loop, it's kind of getting you into the groove of something more like that. So if you have this beat going, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're just gonna play this F chord, right? There's the downbeat of every measure. See, I'm locking into it in a way where I'm still practicing my rhythm, but I'm practicing more than just my rhythm. I'm practicing my dynamics too. I'm kind of like hitting the lower parts of the string on that kick drum, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And on the 3, where the snare is, I'm hitting the higher part of the chord, right? So for the kick, I'm getting the lower percussive part of the guitar string set. For the snare, I'm getting the higher part. So this drum loop is kind of causing me to lock in and play more dynamically, which is what you want to do anyways. You could have the greatest timing in the world, but if you're just playing like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, even if you're rock solid, it's not interesting. So I think using drum loops and having a way to kind of make your own drum loops and stuff too is a really helpful way that you can incorporate different parts of dynamic playing. So you're not just practicing your rhythm, you're also practicing your tonality, you're practicing your dynamic playing, so on and so forth, right? So here's that loop again. So F, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, and then I go to like a G, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But just kind of having that is more of a real life situation that could prepare you to play maybe in a band with a drummer. Even if they don't have a drummer, the nice thing about the busyness of having a kit with different things happening where you're being reminded of the beat more is a really great way to practice and to really solidify your rhythm along with your dynamic playing and other things too.